Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gautama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/supportbuddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Okay, welcome back from break, everyone. We're going to move into this next topic of dissolving the ego. Ego serves no purpose. I'm going to help you understand what it is, some of the problems that you experience because of it, and then how to actually eliminate it and resolve it. So first, let's talk about what the ego is. So the ego is a collection of experiences that you have from your past and your future expectations that you have of yourself. It's accumulation of thoughts, ideas, certain perceptions. Perceptions are like your views and opinions of the world, that we have our self-image and self-identity. The ego contains this arrogance, this pride, this judgment in measuring and comparing itself as either being superior or inferior to others. And the Buddha during his lifetime didn't have access to this word ego. This word ego didn't exist. So when he talked about this, he talks about it in two separate ways. He talks about it as personal existence view, and he talks about it as conceit. And we are now combining this into what we refer to as the ego. But it actually is helpful for you to understand these two things separately, because they have different symptoms and there's different solutions for these things too. So even though I'm describing this particular talk as dissolving the ego, what we're really talking about is eliminating the fetter of personal existence view and conceit. These are the two fetters that we're talking about. And we talked about these yesterday in class, where the personal existence view is the mind clinging to this body or this mind, thinking that this is who you are, thinking that there's a self here. And then there's the conceit, which is the arrogance, the pride, the boastfulness, the judging, the measuring, and the comparing. So since I just talked about these yesterday, I'm not going to go into detail with these, but typically what I do when I do this talk about ego is I go into detail about personal existence view and conceit. But you guys just heard this yesterday, so no need to revisit that stuff unless you guys have questions on this. Do you guys have any questions on what is personal existence view or conceit? You guys understanding what these two fetters are? Okay. All right. So since you guys understand what these two fetters are, now what I'm going to do is walk you through some of the challenges and complications that one experiences as a result of having personal existence view and conceit, or this ego, right? So now I'm going to refer to, when I use the word ego, just remember that I'm referring to personal existence view and conceit. When I talk about them separately, I'll talk about them separately. But when I'm using the word ego, I'm talking about personal existence view and conceit together. So one of the things that the ego does, in addition to everything else you guys have heard me talk about with personal existence view and conceit, is it projects its unwholesome qualities onto others. And then it reads that reflection as coming from that person, when in reality it's coming from one's own mind. So for example, say you're in a business meeting and somebody walks in with really nice tailored clothes. Their hair is just perfectly in in the right position. They have the nicest complexion and they have certain jewelry on. And the mind in the unenlightened state with ego might think, look at him trying to look so handsome. Look at her trying to be so beautiful. Doesn't she think she's special? That's your own mind. That's your own perception. This person just walked in. Only thing that happened is a being just walked into the room. That's all that happened. But the mind is telling itself a story. It's like looking out at the world through a dirty window. And now the mind is looking out at the world through this dirty window like, look at him. He thinks he's so handsome. He's trying to be so special. When in reality, it's you that wants to be handsome or beautiful, or you're the one who wants to look so special. So the mind can oftentimes project these things onto other people and read it as coming from them, when in reality it's coming from your own mind, because all that really happened is somebody just walked into the room. And now with that perception that the mind's clinging to, that look at him trying to look so handsome and doesn't he think he's special, now when you're in this business meeting and this person speaks up and offers an idea, you might be kind of disgruntled and bitter and harsh. And now the other people in the room see your unskillful conduct and it reflects poorly on you, where it was really just your own mind clinging to a perception, looking at this person through this dirty window and thinking that it's them, when in reality it's your own mind, right? Some people are very handsome. Some people are very beautiful. Some people have really nice clothes and their hair looks really wonderful, right? That's just what that being looks like at that particular time. And others, maybe we're not as so groomed, we're not so manicured, right? So that's just the nature of impermanence. And it's wonderful that we all look different and we have different experiences. But if we want to look so handsome and beautiful, we might project that onto other people. Or if we want to be so special and we want to be above other people, we might project that onto other people and think that it's them, when in reality it's your own mind thinking that way. They don't necessarily think that way. They just walked in, and that's just the way that their physical appearance happens to look. It doesn't mean that they're trying to be special or they're trying to be handsome. Maybe they just are. Maybe they just are beautiful. Maybe they just are handsome. Maybe they just have nice clothes. They're not trying to be any particular way. But the mind with this ego will project it on others and think that it's them, when in reality it's coming from one's own mind. And this is where the mind is experiencing judgment, where you're judging another being. You're judging them to be a certain way. What the mind does with the ego is it judges others and it tries to determine what is unwholesome or wholesome for other people. And it might even step in and try to tell people, do this and do that and do this, and you're doing this wrong and you're doing that wrong. So the mind will judge other people of what is wholesome and unwholesome. And then this is causing problems in one's own mind too, because the mind's putting yourself above or below other beings. As long as you're judging other people, it's actually harming your own mind. This is the exact words from the Buddha, where he says, judgment harms yourself, essentially is what he says, that it's harming your own mind. So when you're judging other people and looking down on them and thinking that they're doing something so unwholesome, you're training your mind to have that judgment, that conceit. You're allowing that to continue, and it's just harming your own mind, because now you can't relate to this person and have a harmonious relationship because you're looking down on them in a certain way. So when you're judging people, you're going to put your mind above people, you're going to put yourself below people. And now when you put yourself above people and you talk down to people, you are maybe being arrogant or boastful or prideful. And now that person doesn't feel comfortable and they'll tend to push you aside. They're not interested because they have wrong view. Maybe they're experiencing painful feelings because of this ego. And now they think the way to solve that is to push you aside and reject you. But also, if you put yourself below people, this is just as dangerous. If you have like a boss that you look up to and you admire, or a teacher or some member of your community, and you look up to them so highly and you think that you're less of a person, when you put yourself below them, you're going to feel shaken up. You're not going to feel comfortable when you're around this person. And your uncomfortableness is coming from your own mind. Whenever you're around another person and you feel uncomfortable around that person, it's coming from your own mind. We oftentimes blame that on someone else. We might say, you make me uncomfortable, or that person makes me feel uncomfortable. If you're feeling uncomfortable around somebody, this is your own mind that's doing this because of craving, desire, attachment. So when you're judging people and putting yourself above or below them, you'll feel uncomfortable around certain people. And when you're in a social situation, say you're in a social situation and some people you think is above you and some people you think are below you, your mind will be constantly cycling, trying to figure out, how do I talk to these people and how do I talk to these people? Because the mind's trying to figure out, I got to talk down to these people and I got to talk up to these people. Where what you're looking to do is get to this permanent peace and this permanent joy. Whereas if in a social situation, you're having to obsessively figure out who's below you and who's above you, you're not going to be calm. You're not going to be peaceful. And you're going to say and do things that you probably regret. So by thinking of everybody as being equal, even though we have different roles in society, we can think about everybody as being equal. That If you are of one particular job or occupation or one particular income level or one particular type of thing like that, you don't have to consider yourself above people or below people. You can just consider everybody as being equal. So even though there is a prime minister or president of a country and there's maybe somebody outside sweeping the streets, all these people are exactly the same. But other people are going to try to think that the president is more important and this person sweeping the streets is a less of a person or something like that. While other people might think that way, it's important that your mind doesn't. You can't control what other people do, but you can control your own mind. So wherever you see your mind judging other people and thinking of people in a kind of like a pecking order, you got to get away from that, because that's the animal instincts that we're going to talk about this afternoon that's actually doing that. Because in the animal world, we need conceit. We need a pecking order in the animal world. Because as I was mentioning yesterday, if we were in a herd of elephants and we didn't know who the matriarch of our herd was, we wouldn't have survived, because the matriarch of our herd, she was showing us where to eat, she was showing us the watering holes, and she was showing us the migration paths. If we didn't know these things, we would have died. Or if we didn't know who the alpha male and alpha female is in our pack of wolves, we wouldn't have learned how to hunt. We wouldn't have learned how to survive. So we needed conceit. We needed a pecking order in the animal world, because that's what allowed us to survive. But because of our constant animal existences and now coming into the human world, we retain that consciousness of that pecking order. And oftentimes with ego, when you go into a social situation, you might be looking for where are you in this pecking order. And now your mind's shaken up by that, because in some situations you feel like you're above people, and other situations you feel like you're below people, and now your mind's having to obsessively figure that out, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. You can even feel exhausted, because the mind's constantly having to put yourself above or below people. It's exhausting to the mind to have to do this. So when you can think of all beings as being equal, you can just be peaceful. You can just talk to everybody the same. Polite, kind, friendly, respectful. If it's a street sweeper on the street, I'm going to why that person. Hello. Good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am. How are you? Same thing. If I see the president of Thailand, good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am. How are you? Nice to see you. Same exact way, right? I don't have to change anything, because I don't want anything from those people. I'm just interested in being polite, kind, friendly, respectful to them. But oftentimes when there's craving in the mind, you meet this person who's in this high position and wow, they can do so many wonderful things for me. I want them to help me in life and propel me. So now you might feel like you have to talk up to them and you have to be less of a person, and your mind's all shaken up because you're wanting to convince them to maybe do something for you that you want them to do. But if you don't have craving and you just see everybody as equal and you can be humble, then you don't want anything from this person. You're just being polite, kind, friendly, respectful, and whatever happens, happens. You just have a good conversation with this person. So being humble and seeing everybody as equal will allow you to reside more peaceful and joyful with everyone around you, and you won't experience people rejecting you in situations. And also in those business meetings that I was talking about, you don't cling to your perceptions where you're clinging to a certain perception about somebody else based on your own ego, so that now your conduct won't become unskillful when somebody walks in and your mind's thinking, oh, look at them. They think they're so handsome. They think they're so special. And now you become unskillful in the meeting, and it damages your professional career. So by getting rid of this ego, it actually will help you to reside harmoniously with all beings and feel more comfortable in your own skin, because you're not putting yourself above or below people. There are certain perceptions that the mind's going to cling to when the ego is there, certain beliefs, certain opinions that the mind's clinging to. And the Buddha teaches you to eliminate any kind of perceptions in your mind. What a perception is a belief or opinion or view, and it may or may not actually be true. And the mind oftentimes clings to this. One of the examples I give you to understand what a perception is and how important it is to not cling to perceptions. At one time, I was training to be a police officer when I was very young. I was like 16 years old. I was in a junior cadet program. And one of the things they teach you is to not cling to perceptions, because as a police officer, you're taught to investigate. And if you're clinging to perceptions, you can find yourself in big trouble. So for example, if you're a police officer and you got a call on the radio that says, hey, there's a man at the convenience store robbing the teller. We just got a call for a robbery. He's got a gun. Go down there and solve this problem. That's not how they talk. They have codes, right? They have different codes, right? But you guys understand what I'm saying, right? They send this police officer down to this convenience store. Well, now if the police officer shows up, lights and sirens are blaring, and jumps out of the car, and he goes into the convenience store, she goes into the convenience store and sees a person on the floor bleeding, and then there's a person in a black hoodie standing over top of him with a gun like this. Well, if the police officer clings to their perceptions, they might walk in, pull their gun, and shoot that guy, right? They might have just shot the good guy. They might have shot the guy, that might have been the cashier. And the cashier might have gotten and managed to get the gun out of the person's hand and actually shot the person who was robbing. And that might be who's on the floor. So if a police officer clings to their perceptions and they just walk in and shoot that guy with the gun, they might have just put themselves in jail for the rest of their life with a split-second decision. Right? This is clinging to perceptions. But what police officers are trained to do is to walk in, pull their gun, and say, put down the gun. Put down the gun. Because if this is a person who's doing harm, this person's going to usually turn to the police officer and start shooting. Right? But if you're the person who's the cashier and you've got the gun and you turn and you see there's a police officer and they say, put down the gun. Well, of course, help is here. So I'm putting down the gun, right? Because the police officer's here, right? So the police officers are trained to do this, that they don't cling to their perception, because you can get in a whole lot of trouble. You've just come onto the scene and you don't know what's transpired. All you did is got a call that said, there's someone at the convenience store with a gun, go take care of it, right? And you got to show up and you've got to investigate. So in all situations where you're encountering various things, whether it's business or personal, you're not interested in clinging to your perceptions, but the ego will have you cling to your perceptions. Because of your own ego, because of the arrogance and the pride and the boastfulness, you'll look at another individual and you'll cling to your perceptions of that person without having asked any questions, without having investigated, without having understood this person as an individual being. It's like looking out at the world through a dirty window. Because this ego is in the way, this pollution is in the way, and you're looking out at the world and you're not seeing this person as they truly are. You're not loving this person as they truly are. You're not seeing who they are as a person, but you're looking at them through your own ego. So it's important to not cling to any perceptions, is get that stuff out of the way. Some of the words that the Buddha shares on this is he says, you should see the seen as the seen and the heard as the heard. What he's basically saying is that if you haven't seen it and you haven't heard it, then don't consider it to be the truth. That, for example, like I gave an example the other day when my son was here, like say with a child, say you tell a child like, hey, I would like you to clean your room today. Go clean your room. Well, maybe they've been in their room for an hour or two, and then maybe you walk into their room and their room has like stuff spread out all over the floor. And if you cling to your perception, you might think that they didn't clean their room because you just opened their door and you see stuff all over their floor. But what would be wise is, instead of clinging to a perception that they didn't clean their room, instead ask them, did you clean your room? And what you might hear back is they would say, yeah, I actually did clean my room, but 3 seconds before you walked in, my hip bumped into that box of marbles and it dumped the marbles all over the floor, and that's why the marbles are all over the floor. It just happened 3 seconds before you walked in. Whereas if you cling to your perception, you might walk in, see their room is a mess with marbles all over the place, and now you might think that they didn't listen to you and they didn't follow through on what it was that you asked them. So whenever you are just showing up to a particular situation, it's important to ask questions. And when you're asking questions, you can then hear the response, and this will ensure that you're not clinging to your perceptions and just what's going on within your own mind. So you need to get really good at asking well-described questions and well-defined questions, and maybe a series of questions, in order to be able to understand the truth about any particular thing. So when my son comes home from school and he tells me about something that's going on in school, I don't ever believe what he tells me. I ask him a whole series of questions. And then after he answers my questions, then I might talk to one of his friends and I'll ask his friends, or I might talk to the teachers, or I might talk to the principal, and I might ask them a whole lot of questions. And then I can compare what everybody's sharing with me to be able to figure out the truth. You know the old adage, right? Like there's your story, there's his story, and then there's the truth. right? So what you're looking to do is get to the truth. So you hear this person's story, you hear this person's story, and then you got to figure out what the truth is. So figuring out the truth is to not cling to your perceptions, but understand that your ego, because of this arrogance and pride and boastfulness, it's going to want you to cling to your perceptions. And by clinging to your perceptions, if these perceptions are untrue, if they're false, that means you're going to start making decisions based on false information. So how could you ever get to wise decisions that's producing wholesome results if you're making decisions based on clinging to your perceptions? You wouldn't be able to do that. So that's why before you make any decisions in the world, you'd like those decisions to be wise, and you need to be sure that the mind's not clinging to any particular perception. So that's where before I make decisions about what I'm going to do to solve any particular issue that my son's facing at school, I've got to ask him a whole bunch of questions. And I got to ask the teachers a whole bunch of questions. And I need to ask his friends a whole bunch of questions. And then once I've gotten all the information, now I'm going to make a decision to figure out what I need to do at the school in order to solve this particular issue that I'm facing. Whereas if I just listen to my son and I rush into the school and start making a bunch of decisions, I might be making decisions based on false truths. And now I'm making unwise decisions that's producing unwholesome results. So you can eliminate this by eliminating your clinging or your holding on to any kind of perception and ask questions to be able to get to the truth. So not only can the ego project its unwholesome qualities on others and read that as coming from them when in reality it's coming from your own mind, it can also project certain wholesome qualities onto other people, expecting other people to do things your way. Like, let's just say, like, you've decided to eat plant-based food and you've now moved to plant-based food. Well, the mind can think like, look at me, I'm so righteous, I'm so wonderful, everybody else should be eating plant-based food too. And if they're not eating plant-based food like me, they're a bad person, right? And they're a horrible person, right? So even the wholesome qualities that are in your mind as you're developing your mind, you need to be aware of the conceit where it can project those wholesome qualities onto others and just think that everybody should do things your way. So as you're becoming wiser and wiser and you're cleaning up your life practice, it's important to remember that this is what you're choosing to do. And other people are different places in their practice. So while you may have decided to move to a plant-based food supply, or maybe you've decided to not drink alcohol or use drugs, or maybe you've decided to not steal or have sexual misconduct, there's other people in the world that are still doing those things. They haven't cultivated the wisdom. They haven't eliminated those cravings. And we don't need to look down on them and think of them as less of a person. That's just where they are in their practice. One of the things that the Buddha teaches is he says anything that you are experiencing in life, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome or like misfortune, he says, you've experienced those exact same things. Like if you see somebody else experiencing some misfortune, he says you've experienced that same exact thing in this life or some previous life. So if you see somebody doing something unwholesome, the Buddha is saying you've done those exact same things, either in this life or some previous life. So how could we ever judge other people as being bad or good if they're actually doing the exact same thing that we used to do? We used to do those exact same things in this life or some previous life. So everybody's on their own journey and everybody's evolving at their own pace. So just because you might choose to eat plant-based food or you've chosen to no longer drink alcohol or use drugs, there's other people out there that are struggling with that. So it's important not to allow the ego to take those wholesome qualities that you're developing, project that onto other people, and expect that other people are going to do those same exact things. People need to progress at their own pace, and some people aren't even willing to do the work. Some people are just going to stay in that sorrow and misery and despair throughout this entire life, and they're going to die in that misery and that despair, and that's their choice. That's what they're choosing to do. Where we're around people that are willing to heed our advice and willing to take suggestions and guidance, the Buddha says it's wise to share with other people and be encouraging and helpful and supportive and provide guidance to other people. But you need to be careful because the ego is going to want to jump in there and tell everybody else what they should or shouldn't do, where you need to be sure there's an open door. Whereas if you just jump on people and tell people what they should and shouldn't do, put your expectations on people, people are going to be pushing you away, because this is your own ego just jumping in there thinking, I know what's right here, and I'm going to tell other people what they should and shouldn't do. Instead, you need to ask people, are you open to hearing my suggestions? Would you like some advice on that? We were talking about this a little bit yesterday, right? Would you like my advice on that? Would you like my suggestions on that? And if people say yes, they're interested, then share that with them. But also be aware, 5 seconds into that, a minute into that, their ego can rise up and they're not interested, right? So you need to be aware and observant about your own ego, but also other people's ego will rise up sometimes. So for me, I don't share anything with anybody unless they're interested in learning and understanding. Because if I went around just haphazardly giving advice to people in an unsolicited way, they haven't solicited my input, that would be my own ego. I think I know what's right. That person is doing something wrong, and let me tell them what they need to be doing, right? That's not my place. My place is for those people who are interested in guidance, I'm here to teach them. They need to choose to have guidance, and then I will help them. But if someone hasn't chosen for guidance, I'm not even interested in sharing with them because it's a waste of time. There's plenty of other people out there that are choosing to seek guidance, that if I waste my time over here with people that aren't even interested and that their mind's closed to what it is I have to share, I'm just wasting my time, and I'm taking away from these people who are truly interested in learning. So if you choose to do that in your own life, you'll see that you'll be much more effective, because when you're sharing guidance and support and encouragement, you're sharing it with people who are truly open to it. Where when people have a closed mind, you're just wasting your time. You can't teach through an ego. It's just not possible. You can't teach through an ego. If the ego's up, it's like a brick wall. You can't get through it. So that doesn't make sense for you to actually try to teach through an ego. You're just wasting your time. So be aware that as you're becoming more and more wise, as you're becoming more and more wholesome, the ego might project those qualities onto others and expect that other people should be that way. When in reality, you just need to understand that everybody's progressing in their own journey at their own pace. And just because you're at a certain place doesn't mean other people are going to be at that place either. So if you eliminate judgment, where you're not measuring and comparing what you're doing in other people, then you can get away from this. Whereas if your mind has this ego, you're going to measure and compare, and you're going to think that you're maybe farther ahead than other people, and you're going to think that you're so great, perhaps. Or the other side, you can think that you're so low, and wow, like everybody else is so far ahead of me. But when you understand that you're on your own independent journey, you can free your mind of that measuring and comparing, that judging of other people. So ultimately what I share that the ego serves no purpose. Sometimes people say you can't live life without an ego. This is not true. People think that you will die without an ego. There's people out there that think that way, but this is because they don't understand what the ego is. The ego is the arrogance, the boastfulness, the pride, the measuring and comparing, the judging other people, putting yourself above them or putting yourself below them. Without the ego, your life will be so much better. It really doesn't serve any purpose. Some people think you need an ego in order to defend yourself and protect yourself, that somehow it's going to help you to protect yourself, but it's not, because you're going to just make unwise decisions through this ego. So when you get rid of this ego, then you can actually make wise decisions. That's what's going to protect you, is your wise decision making. But with an ego, you can't make wise decisions. You're going to make unwise decisions. So the ego serves no purpose, and it ultimately needs to be eliminated. So in terms of eliminating it, you need to look at it as two separate things. The personal existence view, like we mentioned, that's one aspect. That's one of the fetters that the Buddha talked about. And then there's conceit. These are the two fetters. We're calling these two things the ego, but in reality, the Buddha separated them because they're actually producing unique symptoms between these two pollutions, and there's unique remedies or solutions to each of these. Yesterday, I explained to you guys all the ones for personal existence view. We already talked about these, but do you guys have any questions on any of the solutions to eliminate personal existence view, either here or online? Do you guys have any questions on this? Online. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions online either. about personal existence view. So these are all the different remedies that we talked about yesterday, and I went through them in detail. I explained to you what personal existence view is, and we talked about some of the symptoms, and then I gave you these solutions. And we're going to talk about this more in the retreat in August if you guys end up coming to that. We're going to spend an entire class period on this. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into talking about conceit, because I've described conceit yesterday, and I talked a little bit about it today too, but now I'm going to talk to you about the solutions of how to eliminate conceit from the mind. Remember, you need the Eightfold Path on board. That's like a given for everything related to the teachings of the Buddha. That's the foundation. Without the Eightfold Path, you wouldn't be able to just go in and implement these things to eliminate conceit. You're going to need the Eightfold Path there as a foundation to support you in eliminating conceit. But then once you get your arms around that, you would like to be working on eliminating this conceit. And conceit is a very strong fetter. It takes a really long time to eliminate it. I would say easily 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes even longer, to be able to eliminate this. So this isn't like a 1 week thing or a 1 month thing or even a 1 year thing. It's going to take a long time to gradually wear away this ego, this conceit. So you'd like to start early, and you'd like to implement as many of these things as possible so that you come at it at different angles, where it's not just one thing that you do. It's not like a pill that you take a pill and then 30 minutes later you don't have a headache anymore. You need to come at it with multiple angles. It's like a jackhammering it. So one of the first things you can do is learn to say thank you and sorry and please and talk really polite with people. Sometimes when the ego is there, we think like, they don't deserve it. You know, sometimes we're taught, I'm not going to respect you until you respect me, right? This is what we're taught, is don't respect anybody until they respect you. Well, if everybody practiced that in the world, nobody would be respecting anybody, because everybody would be holding back and nobody would be respecting anybody, because I'm not going to respect you until you respect me. So a person moving to enlightenment and an enlightened being, they're not a follower. They don't just conform to what other people are doing. So when you see the lack of wisdom in that whole idea of I'm not going to respect you until you respect me, if you can see the lack of wisdom in that instead, what would be wise would be to respect others. And then because you're respecting others, your dhamma is that people are going to respect you. Because when you put out respect, respect is going to come back to you. But if you hold on to your respect and you don't respect people, then people aren't going to respect you. And I saw this very clearly as I was raising my son. When I grew up, my family hardly ever said, I love you. Like, I don't even remember a time where my mom said, I love you growing up. In my 30s, I had to ask her. I asked her, Mom, do you love me? And she was like, yeah, of course. Why? I was like, because you've never said it. I've never heard you say that you love me. So when I was having my son, I knew that I grew up without hearing that from my mom. And I was interested in ensuring that my son regularly heard from me that I love him. And I show it through my actions, of course, but I also say it to him as well. And I knew that in telling him that he loved me, I knew that someday he would actually tell me too. So all growing up, when he was an infant and a toddler and he couldn't even talk, I would tell him, I love you, even though he couldn't talk, because I didn't expect him to say it back to me. I was just saying it because I love him. But then somewhere around, 5, 6 years old, one day he said to me, Dad, I love you. Like, oh, thank you, son. It was so nice, because I put it out, and I've been putting it out for 4, 5, 6 years, and here it is. It's coming back to me. And he still does this today. Sometimes before he goes to sleep, he'll walk into my room and say, Dad, I love you. Good night. I'm like, oh, good night, son. Right? So whatever you put out is going to come back to you. You need to initiate these kinds of things. So the same thing goes with respect, that you're going to need to respect people in order for people to respect you. And I'm sure you like it when people respect you. And the same thing is true about thank you, sorry, using polite words like ma'am or sir or things like this. As you put that out, that's what's going to come back to you too. People will speak to you in that same way. I talk to my son that way. I'll say, yes, sir, no, sir, or can you help me with this, sir? And then when he does, I'll say, oh, thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. Every once in a while, I'll drop the word sir in there so he can learn how to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. And he tends to talk that way with me too. Every once in a while, he will use the word sir. One of the other phrases that's really good for the ego is this last one where I say, I do not know. Right? Because the ego doesn't want to say that, right? When somebody asks you a question, you'll meander and meander and meander because the mind just doesn't want to say, I don't know, right? So one of the most healthy things for the mind is to just say, I don't know. because you're not an expert in everything. You don't know everything. When somebody asks you a question, you don't know everything. Even an enlightened being, I don't know. If someone asked me right now how to make lasagna, I'd say, I don't know. I made it once, but I don't know how to make it. Or if someone said, can you help me fly this helicopter? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't know how to fly a helicopter, right? So there's certain things that people are going to ask you that you don't know, even when you're enlightened. Now, by the time you're enlightened, if they ask you about the teachings of the Buddha, you know those and you'd be able to share that with them. But when it comes to things like making lasagna or flying an airplane or a helicopter, you might not know how to do that. So when people ask you questions, it's really healthy for the mind to say, I do not know. Right? It's really helpful. So do that, and that'll help you to become more humble. This one here, the second one, is actually the very best thing that you could do in order to eliminate conceit. It's something that will only take you about 1 minute to set up. And then from that point forward, you'll just be reaping the rewards of it, which is to sleep in a low position. And this might sound strange for those of us who aren't used to that kind of thing, but this is the one thing that you can take about 1 minute to set it up and then just forget about it. And just by you going down low into bed each day and getting up out of bed each day, this really humbles the mind. So this is something you can do like right now, right? It doesn't take more than 1 minute of effort. And then from that point forward, your mind will become more and more humble. Here in Thailand, it's hard to find a bed that is high, right? All the beds are like from your knee height down. And that's what you would like, is to have a bed that's from the height of your knee down, because Thai people know this. They don't make their beds high. But oftentimes in cultures where there's a lot of ego, if you come from a culture where there's a lot of ego, look at how we sleep. We sleep in really high positions with lots of blankets and pillows and fluff and luxury. And that's what promotes the ego. So even when you go back to your home country, if you have a really high bed, if you get it down onto the ground and get it really low, this will really help you. So for me, what I did is I just got rid of the frame. I got rid of the box spring. I just put the mattress straight on the floor. And getting down into bed and getting up out of bed each day, it'll really help humble the mind. Do tasks that you feel are beneath you. If there are certain tasks that you think are beneath you, this is really helpful for the mind. Like maybe you think washing dishes is beneath you, or mopping floors or scrubbing floors, or I don't know, any number of tasks. At one time, I used to do these kinds of things where I would wash dishes and scrub floors and all this stuff, because I was single when I was first coming out of college. I used to do all this stuff. But as I started working and I was in business and I was getting more and more wealthy, I had employees. There was even times where I had maids and people like this that were living with us, and we had a maid's room, and the maids would be cleaning each day. There would even be times where I would go to work and I would pick up a mop and I would start mopping or vacuuming, and my employees would come over and they didn't like that. And they would grab the vacuum out of my hand, or they would grab the mop out of my hand. So my mind started becoming conceitful, right? It started thinking like, wow, look at me. My employees won't even let me mop. They won't even let me vacuum. I thought I was so great. So there was a period of time where I did do these things, but then there was a period of time where I didn't do it, and I thought I was above people. And my mind was conceitful, and I thought these tasks were below me because I had these maids, I had these employees, and I thought these tasks were below me. So I needed to train my mind to wash dishes and to scrub the floor and to scrub the bathroom and get down on my hands and knees and scrub, right? So if you're not used to doing those kinds of things, there might be certain tasks that you feel are beneath you. These are just some of the ones that I'm referencing. You can find those types of tasks and actually do them, and this will help your mind to be more humble. You can listen to others teach you wisdom without any interest in teaching them. So oftentimes when we're in a situation where somebody's teaching, sometimes the mind feels like, oh, I need to teach that person something. Or say you're in a social situation where a bunch of friends are at a table and somebody shares something about their life, you might feel like you need to come over the top of them. That's the ego coming over the top. Like somebody's like, oh yeah, I just got this brand new car, blah, 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 blah. It costs this much money. You might be like, oh, well, I had that kind of car before in the past. And, actually it's not so great. And here's the better car. And I've got this car now, and you should try to look at this one. So sometimes the mind tries to come over the top of people. So if you can put the mind in a situation, and you guys are doing that now, where you're listening to somebody teach without an interest in teaching that person, this is really helpful for the mind. And you can do this outside of a classroom environment too, where like I used to go to people like elders in the community, and I would just sit down with them and start asking them questions. I'd be like, so, how old are you? Where are you from? What kind of work did you do? Or what did you learn in that job? What is some advice that you've accumulated over the course of your life that you would share with someone who's younger than you, right? You can ask these kinds of questions and without any interest in teaching that person anything particular, because the ego is not going to want to sit there and listen to somebody else teach. And when you hear somebody say something wise, the ego is going to want to come over the top of them, and it's going to want to teach them something like, oh yeah, you think that's wise? Let me show you this. Let me teach you this. That's not what you actually say, but that's what the mind's thinking. That when you hear somebody that's maybe pretty articulate or pretty wise or teaching something, you might feel like you need to come over the top of them, where you don't need to do that. You can just listen and learn to listen to others. This other one is really helpful for the mind, washing people's feet. This is something that's done in Thai society. Even Jesus Christ, we were talking about Christianity just a little bit ago on break. Even Jesus Christ taught this as well. Jesus Christ didn't say why, but the reason why is because it humbles the mind, right? When here in Thailand, they have something called a dham hua, that on your birthday, on New Year's, on Mother's Day, Father's Day, on Teacher's Day, on things like this, you might choose to wash somebody's feet. Like you might wash your parents' feet, or you might wash your teacher's feet, or something like this. They have certain times of year, and it's based on your own choices. You're not required to do it. Nobody's forcing you to do it. It's not like a countrywide announcement, but you learn growing up as a child that this is a practice that you can do that helps you to humble your mind. So you take a little basin of water and you take it over and you put it under your mom or dad's feet, and you slowly wash their feet, and you say some nice words to them, some nice, kind, and polite words, saying, hey, thank you for everything you've done for me to bring me into the world and share this life with me. I really value what you've done to help me become a better and better person, and thank you. And then you take their feet out and you dry them off. It only takes about 5 minutes to do it, and you might actually be shaken up if it's the first time you've done it. And even the person you're doing it to, their mind might be uncomfortable with it, but this is the ego starting to let go. That you might feel uncomfortable getting down on the floor on your knees in front of your parents or in front of a teacher or somebody like this. You might feel strange doing this, but as you do it each time, the mind becomes more and more comfortable with it. And that's the ego that's letting go. When I did this for my mom and my grandmother, not only was my mind uncomfortable at first, but their mind was too, because they weren't used to this kind of thing. So you can learn to be humble without putting yourself below people. So when I was down on the floor, washing my mom's feet or my grandmother's feet, or I've even washed my wife's feet before, or her parents, I've washed their feet before. And when I was doing this, I wasn't thinking that I was beneath them or that I was lower than them. I was just thinking that I would like to show my respect and my gratitude to them. And by being down on the floor, it was allowing my mind to be more humble and washing their feet. So you can choose to do this if you like. If you'd ever like to learn how to do this, I can show you and teach you how to do this so that you can do it for the people that are maybe helpful in your life and that are helping you in life. This is a great way to show them your appreciation and gratitude, but also it humbles your mind. We can tell people I love you all day long, but it's our actions that speak louder than our words. And what I noticed is washing people's feet, one of the most warm and loving ways to show my love and show my care, because it's an action of just lightly and delicately washing someone's feet. It really is a nice warm gesture, and that person can feel your warmth and feel your love. So for those of you guys that are interested in doing this, you can always ask me and I'll show you what this is about. But this is something that will really help you. You can show respect and gratitude to people with a why. This why that the Thai people do, I don't know where it came from, but I suspect that when Thai people were in different tribes, because at one time they were in different tribes, there's different ethnic groups. They actually spoke different languages. Now they have a unifying language within the whole country, but at one time they spoke different languages in different regions of Thailand. And I suspect when they came together, they couldn't communicate with each other because they spoke different languages, but they were living close by with each other. But if you saw someone really far away and you wide them like this, it's like, hey, I respect you. I don't have anything in my hands. I don't have any weapons. I'm not here to harm you. I only mean goodness for you, right? And now when you're approaching that person from another village or from another kingdom, they would know that you're not there to cause them any harm. I suspect that that's where that comes from. But one of the things that we do is we bow our head as we're doing it. And this helps the mind to become more humble. So by living in Thailand like this, even though we're from Western culture, if you get used to going around and whying people, 10, 15, 20 different people throughout your day, because you're going to come in contact with different people. When you go to the restaurants, when you go to your apartment or your village, there might be security guards there. When you go to the temple, different times, your friends, when you see your friends, if you're whying to your friends and different things like this, 10, 15, 20 times a day, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, and you're also sleeping on the floor and doing all these other things. It really humbles the mind. So even when I'm riding my motorbike out of my village, there's security guards there that open the gate. Not that we need security guards, but they're kind of like greeters. The way I think about it is they kind of greet people as they come in and out of the village. I bow my head as I'm going through the gate because I can't put my hands together, but I will bow my head. And they usually stand there and salute me. Right? Or they will why me because they know that I'm being respectful. And now the security guards, having been there for a certain time, they know each time I come and go, I bow my head, I'm respectful to them. Sometimes I even stop my motorbike and I will why them. If the gate's not open yet, I will stop and I will why them. So now I imagine that they know that, hey, this guy's pretty polite, so that now before I even get there, oftentimes the gate's already open because they see me coming. So I don't why them because I want something from them. I just why them because I'm interested in respecting all people. But as I'm respecting all people, then what you'll notice is respect will come back to you and people will do things for you based on their own choices and their own decisions. So it'll humble your mind, but you also see it opens up your relationships. Even when I traveled 2 years ago and I went to America, I went to Washington, D.C., to Florida, to New York. I even went to Egypt because I was teaching in all these different places. I was whying people. Right? I was whying at the hotel when I showed up in Washington, D.C. I would why the front desk. Oh, they smiled. They were so cheerful. And then I noticed people started doing the same thing with me. I did the same thing in Egypt. When I went to Egypt, even though it's not part of their culture, I was whying people in Egypt. And I was saying, Assalamu alaikum. And I was whying to the hotel clerks. And then when we called down and we needed help, boom, they were right there helping us. Again, I wasn't whying them because I wanted something from them. This was just my practice. The same way that I function here in Thailand, I function the same way whether I'm in America or Egypt. I'm getting ready to go to Mexico. I'll do the same thing. I'll probably say, ¿Cómo está? Right? Hola. Right? When I go down to Mexico, and I'm sure that they understand, like, hey, this guy's being very respectful. He's being very kind. And then doors just open up for you. That's not the reason why I'm whying, but you'll just notice that those kinds of things happen. So it'll humble your mind, but it'll also help you become more harmonious with the people around you. When you develop a practice of whatever your practice is that got you to enlightenment, you'll be able to practice that everywhere. It cuts through cultural barriers. Sometimes we feel like we need to learn each individual culture in each individual country, but the natural laws of existence cuts through culture. It cuts through all of that and gets you to a point where you're practicing wisely, where a particular cultural thing in one country, if you practice that cultural thing in another place, it might not go over so well. Right? The Dalai Lama just saw this recently, a few months ago, where he did something very cultural, where he was talking about sucking the tongue. I don't know if you guys heard about this, where this was a cultural thing where people in his country say this regularly and it's a normal thing. But then when he did it in another environment, people took offense to it. Right? So if you understand the natural laws that the Buddha teaches you, you can actually use those natural laws and that wisdom, and you can go to any country in the world, and it cuts through all that cultural stuff that you can now practice in a way that people will find to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful because you're practicing the natural laws rather than this cultural things that sometimes can be viewed by other people as impolite or unkind or unfriendly or disrespectful. Okay, so whying people is something that I've seen universally is accepted and understood by all people. I've even seen celebrities in Hollywood when they go to award shows and stuff like this. Maybe they're receiving the best actor or best producer award. They will why the audience. This is becoming more and more universally known as a way of saying thank you, showing gratitude, and showing respect to people. Practicing generosity, loving kindness, and compassion. As you learn what each one of those things are through all the various courses that I teach, as you're practicing this will humble the mind as well. Generosity is the giving and sharing without any expectation of anything in return. Loving kindness is a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well, active goodwill. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others, right? Where you have concern for their misfortune, not where you're worried, but you have concern for their misfortune. It doesn't mean that you necessarily take action. It just means that you're concerned about others' misfortune. The opposite of compassion would be indifference, where you could care less what happens to people. And then the other side of compassion would be to be worried and having anxiety about every single misfortune that's happening in the world. So the middle way is to have concern for other people's misfortune. So when you're practicing these three, this will help to humble the mind as well. Some additional ones is eliminate judgment without comparing yourself as being superior or inferior. Whenever you see that occurring, that you see the mind putting yourself above or below people, cut that off. Don't allow the mind to do that. You might even have to internally talk to the mind and be like, you silly mind, what are you talking about? You're not above that person. Or you silly mind, you're not below that person. What are you doing? Just laugh at yourself, right? You can be humorous with yourself. Be kind and gentle because it's the right thing to do, not because you want something from this person. Sometimes we might show up to a place and be polite and respectful because we want something in that environment. But you would like to get to the point where you're not practicing because you want something, but just because you know it's the wise thing to do is to be polite and respectful when you show up to a certain place. You can ask others for advice and what they've learned in life and just listen without trying to prove anything. Sometimes when you hear other people talk about their life and maybe their life was wonderful to a certain degree, you might feel like you need to show them about your life and how great your life is. But you don't need to do that. You can just ask people questions and listen to the things that are going on in their life. You can help others without any expectation of anything in return. This is generosity, without any interest in any kind of positive benefit for yourself, just helping others and practicing generosity. You can seek guidance from a teacher, which is helping the mind to admit that you don't know everything about the world. This is one of the reasons why everybody needs to have a teacher in order to get to enlightenment. A Buddha doesn't need this. They can actually eliminate their ego without having a teacher. But one of the things that helps to eliminate the ego is to have a teacher, because you're admitting to yourself to a certain degree, like, yeah, I don't know how to get to enlightenment. I need help here. And that's a really good thing, right? Because as a person who's not a Buddha, you're going to need help and you're going to need guidance. So seeking guidance from a teacher can be humbling to the mind, because you're admitting to a certain degree that, yeah, you don't know how to do this, that you need help in life. And that's okay. Sometimes the ego can feel diminished to admit that, yeah, I don't know how to live this life in a peaceful way. I need help from somebody of learning how to do this. And that's okay to admit that to the mind. And that's humbling in and of itself, by itself. Whenever arrogance, pride, judgment, measuring, or comparing is arising, cut that off. Let it go. Cut it off, cut it off, cut it off. Anytime you see the mind trying to put itself to be superior or inferior or arrogant or boastful, cut that off. Sometimes in your jokes, sometimes people think it's funny to joke in an egotistical way. Just cut that stuff off. It's not helping you. It's just allowing the ego to continue there. There's ways to make wholesome jokes without putting the ego in there. But also sometimes people joke and diminish themselves. I think they call it self-deprecating jokes or something like this. This isn't wise for you because you're degrading and diminishing yourself. So don't put yourself above people, but don't put yourself below people in your jokes or in your conversations. Wherever you see your mind being boastful, cut that off and don't allow it to do that. Restrain the mind. One of the things that the Buddha says is, he says, before you say something or before you do something, he says you should reflect of, what am I about to say? Is it going to cause harm to others? Is it going to cause harm to me, or is it going to cause harm to both? And if you reflect before you say something and it's going to cause harm to others, it's going to cause harm to yourself, or it's going to cause harm to both, he says you should refrain from saying that thing. Then he says, while you're speaking or while you're doing any particular action, that you should be reflecting. Is this causing harm to others, to me, or to both? And if it is, then you refrain from doing that particular thing. And then he also says, after you do something, you should reflect. Is it causing harm to others, or did it cause harm to others? Did it cause harm to me, or did it cause harm to both? And if any of those things are true, he said you should no longer do those things. So this is what you can do, is look at your own judgment, your own ego, look at it before you're doing things, while you're doing things, and after you're doing things, and ask yourself, is it causing harm to others? Is it causing harm to me, or is it causing harm to both? And if those things are true, then refrain from doing those things at any point in time, because it's just going to produce unwholesome results for you. And then as you're working on your ego, you're going to need to seek guidance from teachers at different times. As you're learning about the ego, you're starting to understand what it is. You're starting to implement some of these things. You might have questions like, hey, I said this the other day to my mom, and I wasn't quite sure. Is this the ego? Or this particular thing happened the other day when I was at work, and I did this particular thing, or I said this particular thing. Is this the ego? And this is part of learning about what the ego is and how to eliminate it. So as you guys have those questions, you're welcome to reach out for support and for guidance, and I will help you to be able to see where the ego is. Because one of the things about the ego is it doesn't typically see itself. The ego is like this bad tenant, right? If you've ever rented property or you've ever been a landlord, if you've ever had a tenant who was in your property and they didn't pay any rent, they weren't giving you any benefit, and every time you showed up and asked them for rent money or you asked them to leave, they kind of convinced you that they needed to stick around for a little bit longer. Hey, that rent is in the mail, or hey, just give me one more week and I'll get you that rent. You know, they'll just kind of drag it out for a while. So your ego is kind of like this bad tenant where it's in your mind and it doesn't want to be evicted. Your ego is going to try to convince you that you're more enlightened than you really are. As you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment, even when you're in those jhanas, the mind's quite peaceful, quite joyful, you're experiencing a certain amount of concentration, the ego is going to come in and try to convince you that you're already enlightened or that you're more enlightened than you really are, right? There's even students who they learn from a teacher and then their mind is becoming more and more peaceful. And those very teachings that they learned from that teacher that led to their mind getting to that mental state, they can think that they're more enlightened than their teacher. And they can think that they're, better than their teacher. They're putting themselves above their teacher. But it was those teachings from that particular teacher that led to that improved mental state. But as they're starting to experience the jhanas, they can think that they're so much better and so much greater than the teacher. But the teacher themselves doesn't think that way. But the student can oftentimes think that way. So the ego is going to try to convince you that you're more enlightened and more wise than you really are. And as it's doing that because it doesn't want to leave. The ego doesn't want to be kicked out. It's holding on with dear life. It's like that bad tenant that it wants to keep its foot in the door, but it's not giving you any benefit. So wherever you see the ego arising, you need to kick it out and get rid of it, right? And be really dedicated to this because it's going to be a consistent long-term thing that you're going to need to do. Wherever you see arrogance and pride coming up, cut that off and eliminate it. Don't allow the mind to do that. And these are some suggestions that are going to help you to be able to accomplish that. So any questions on any of these? No questions? Let me see online. Okay, I'm not seeing any online either. Okay, so these are some words from the Buddha about the ego, helping you to understand how detrimental the ego is. So this one is titled, Gain, Honor, and Praise are an obstacle even for an arahant. Monks, gain, honor, and praise, I say, are an obstacle even for a monk who is an arahant, one with taints destroyed. An arahant is an enlightened being. The taints are the fetters or the pollutions. He's saying that this gain, honor, and praise, right? People sharing gain, honor, and praise with you, there's this potential that the ego can arise. And the Buddha is saying it's an obstacle, even for a monk who's enlightened, one who's eliminated the 10 fetters. So now his student Ananda speaks up. When this was said, the Venerable Ananda is one of his very close students, asked Master Teacher Gautama, why, Venerable Sir, are gain, honor, and praise an obstacle even for a monk with taints destroyed? Ananda's like, hold on a second. If someone's enlightened, that means that they don't have any pollutions in their mind. They've already eliminated the ego. Why would gain, honor, and praise be an obstacle for that person? Because they're already enlightened. So he's rightfully asking the Buddha, like, can you clarify this for me? Like, I don't understand. If this person's enlightened, why would it be an obstacle? So then the Buddha says, I do not say, Ananda, that gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle to his unshakable liberation of mind. But I say they are an obstacle to his attainment of those peaceful dwellings in this very life, which are achieved by one who resides diligent, dedicated, and determined. So dreadful, Ananda, are gain, honor, and praise, so bitter, vile, obstructive to achieving the unsurpassed security from bondage or enlightenment. So what the Buddha is saying is, I didn't say that he's enlightened and it's now an obstacle for him because he's enlightened. Gain, honor, and praise isn't going to shake up his mind because he's already enlightened or she's already enlightened. That's not the problem. They're already enlightened. I didn't say it's an obstacle for them because they're already enlightened. What I'm saying is gain, honor, and praise is an obstacle for their attainment of enlightenment. So you can't control what people say to you. You can't control what people do around you. People are going to give you praise. People are going to give you gain and honor. Especially the more enlightened you become, the more wise you become, people are going to admire your peacefulness. People are going to admire your loving nature, your kindness, and your respect and your politeness. They're going to admire that, and they're going to praise you for that. And you can't control that. The more enlightened you become, the more praise that you're going to get. But what the Buddha is teaching you is don't allow that praise to obsess your mind. Don't allow it to affect you. Don't allow it to arise ego. So if you allow it to arise your ego, you're going to walk around conceited and puffed up and boastful, right? So the Buddha is saying that this gain, honor, and praise, as you're hearing it from people, it can obstruct you from getting to enlightenment. You've got to control your ego and cut it off and let it go and eliminate it so that as you're hearing this gain, honor, and praise, that you don't let it block you from getting to enlightenment. Because as long as the ego is there intact, you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment. So the Buddha is saying it's going to stop you from getting to enlightenment. Therefore, Ananda, you should train yourselves thus. We will abandon the arisen gain, honor, and praise, and we will not let the arisen gain, honor, and praise persist, obsessing our mind. Thus should you train yourself. So he's saying when people are giving you gain, honor, and praise, don't let it obsess your mind. Let it go. Right? Just let it go. So people are going to praise you. And you might say thank you. You might say, oh, I'm so appreciative of your kind words or whatever you might say. But don't allow the mind to take on this conceit or this ego because of that. You can remain humble even though people are giving you gain, honor, and praise. And that's what the Buddha is teaching you and guiding you to do, because otherwise, if you allow that conceit to arise, it's going to hinder you from experiencing enlightenment. Okay? So last thing is, it's wise to always and forever develop your practice to eliminate the ego and never assume that it's been gone. As soon as you assume that your ego's gone, it's still there. One of the things sometimes students ask me, to help them of whether or not they have ego or not. And if I ask a student, you have ego? If a student says, no, I don't have ego, that's the ego. Right? The ego wants to think that I don't have ego. So instead, just never convince yourself that the ego's gone. And anytime you see arrogance or boastfulness or pride, cut it off and eliminate it. Don't let the mind do that. Stay vigilant. It's kind of like that game whack-a-mole. Do you know that game whack-a-mole where the moles are popping up and you hit it with the mallet? Every time it pops up its ugly head, you pop it and pop it and pop it. It's the same thing. Don't think the game is over. If you think the game is over and you're just standing there, next thing you know, one of the moles pop its head up and you missed it. You didn't hit it. So if you think the game's over, if you think that you've eliminated your ego, when the ego raises its head up, you won't see it and you won't whack it down, right? So if you convince yourself that the ego's gone, you'll miss it when it's raising its ugly head. So if you never convince yourself that the ego's gone, wherever you see it, you can root it out. Because you can have periods of time where you might think your ego's gone. You could be 3 months or 6 months where you haven't seen the ego, but then boom, there it comes. It'll pop up. It'll pop its head up. And if you've convinced yourself that it's gone, you'll miss it and you won't cut that off and your mind won't get to enlightenment. So you need to be able to always be vigilant, always be dedicated and determined. That's what the Buddha is saying over here, where he says, but I say they are an obstacle to his attainment of those peaceful dwellings in this very life, which are achieved by one who resides diligent, dedicated, and determined, right? That's what you need to do. You need to stay dedicated, diligent, and determined so that by never convincing yourself that your mind has eliminated the ego, you'll stay dedicated and diligent, that when it pops its head up, you can knock it down. Okay? So anything you guys would like to discuss here about the ego? We're on Wednesday. Maybe you guys are starting to get overloaded a little bit, huh? A lot of information. Yeah, it's understandable. That's one of the reasons why the class starts thinning out as we go through the week. people get enough and they're like, all right, 2 days was enough, or 1 day was enough, or 3 days was enough. And if you guys decide that, that's what you decide, right? If you don't come tomorrow, that's fine. This class is being taught all throughout the years. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our break for lunch. It's 10 minutes to 12. So we usually take an hour and a half lunch. So we'll just go all the way up to 1:30, which gives us an hour and 40 minutes since we finished a little bit early today. When we come back, what I'm going to teach you guys is that next topic. We're going to, of course, start with breathing mindfulness meditation, but that topic this afternoon is animal to human, the evolution of our consciousness. I'm going to help you see how many of us in the human realm have come out of the animal realm and how that many existences in the animal realm have conditioned the consciousness in the human state to function very much like an animal so that you can learn how to extinguish these animalistic instincts. So enjoy your lunch, and perhaps I'll see you guys after lunch and we'll talk about this topic after our meditation. Okay, so thank you for your attention and your interest to learn the teachings.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.